Yeah, you just heard a clip of the song Pleasant Street by Tim Buckley, which is the third track off of his 1967 album Goodbye and Hello. It is number 95 on our list in the 1960s of the best ever albums list. It was released in August of 1967 and ranks number 19 of the best albums in 1967 and 923 overall. It's Buckley's second album out of a total of 9, and it's the only one that we're actually going to be covering in our podcast. So we're going to try to cover a lot of different information about Tim Buckley because this is the only time we're really talking about him. Interestingly enough, his album Star Sailor ranked ahead of this album overall, but it only fell to 186 in the 70s. So if this is 186 in the 70s, but still was higher than this album in the overall tally, I'm seeing that a lot of the 70s albums are at least considered by the best ever albums as better albums than the 60s. So the 70s win, if we're ever having that debate, I guess, as far as this list goes. So Tim Buckley was influenced by several artists. He had growing up, he had a lot of music that was being played by his parents, both his mother and father, and also his grandmother. They varied a lot. There was a lot of jazz. His mom was interested in Miles Davis and a lot of different types of jazz, as well as Frank Sinatra and Judy Garland, while his grandmother was kind of into Bessie Smith and Billie Holiday, some of those, early jazz singers, female jazz singers. And his father was more into country western music of Hank Williams and Johnny Cash. So he was hearing a lot of different types of music, which certainly informed his style as it went on in his career. He was actually born in Washington, D.C. on February 14th, 1947. But he spent
51st state.
Almost, hopefully. But the most interesting thing that I found about Tim Buckley, was that he spent his early childhood in a town called Amsterdam, New York, which is most famous for being located approximately 23 miles east of my hometown of Canajoharie, New York. So I know Amsterdam very, very well. Other noteworthy facts about the town of Amsterdam include that was where the famous Amsterdam Mall was located, where I bought tickets for an REM show in 1995.
And it's like a Rand McNally Atlas right here with fun facts.
I'm just plugging Amsterdam, man. It could use some business. But I also saw a live performance by Gordon and Susan from Sesame Street, circa 1983, and it's also home to the local Taco Bell that my friends and I would visit when we were in high school because there was no Taco Bell near us. We had to drive a half hour for Taco Bell. So
I'd like to say thank you to all those listeners still listening to the podcast at this point.
Tim Buckley was in Amsterdam, New York. I just found that very fascinating because nobody's really in Amsterdam, New York. So, but he did move. His family moved to Bell Gardens, California in 1956, where he went to high school and really started getting more into music. He taught himself the banjo at the age of 13 and did form a folk group with some of his friends that was by the Kingston Trio. And he played a lot of sports, including high school football, where he broke 2 fingers on his left hand during a game, which permanently damaged them to the point where he could not play bar chords, which, if anybody knows, bar chords are kind of a standard way of playing a powerful guitar chord sound, and he was not able to do that. So I found that to be interesting as well. While in high school, he met and befriended Larry Beckett, who eventually would become his future lyricist. And Larry Beckett is credited with co-writing many songs off of this album. And he forms 2 different bands with a bassist, Jim Fielder, the Bohemians, which were more of a pop rock type band. And then a band called Harlequin 3, which included folk with spoken word and beat poetry elements, which is not surprising at all. That after hearing the album that we're about to talk about. In 1965, he attended Fullerton College for a couple weeks, but then he dropped out and he played in many different music clubs. College wasn't his thing. He wanted to play music, and he got his big break in 1966, early 1966, when he ran into Jimmy Carl Black, who was the drummer from the Mothers of Invention, which is another band that we're going to be talking about in a couple weeks. And Black introduced him to the Mothers of Invention manager, Herb Cohen, who saw Buckley's potential and booked him to an extensive gig at the Night Owl Cafe in Greenwich Village. And that's basically where he was noticed by some big wigs at Elektra Records, and he signed his first record contract in 1966.
So did he pull sort of like a Dylan, Matt, and then he just showed up in New York City from a small town and started playing and then hooked up with the people that would ultimately be his musical collaborators? I'm not certain of this, so yeah, I'm curious.
It sounds like it, but it also sounds like that manager, Herb Cohen, had a little bit more to do with that. I think that it wasn't like Tim Buckley just walked in and started playing. He got some connections while he was still in California, which, this gig at the Night Owl Cafe was something that was an ongoing thing. So he got a little bit of help with it, but that's essentially where he was noticed. And, he was a young guy. In 1966, he was 19.
He was 19 when this album was produced, right?
20, I believe, because this album was 67 a year later. So he had one album prior to it, which was kind of seen as probably of all of his albums, it was seen as the most straightforward and listener-friendly album that he ever had. But it also seemed like he was holding back, that the people that were working with him had said that he was not really being true to himself. So this album that came out, the second album, Goodbye and Hello, was seen more as a step forward. He's kind of coming into his own as a songwriter and is really more representative of what he wanted to do and what he was trying to do.
Well, we're all a little more straightforward at 19, aren't we, Josh?
Absolutely. I'm an unchanged individual. So.
There you go.
So, I already kind of talked about this beforehand, of not being familiar with Tim Buckley at all, really musically. I assume that's the case for you guys?
Absolutely.
No clue?
I'll let you take the lead, Josh.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about him. Do you get a sense, Matt, of if his style pretty much remained the same through the rest of his albums?
It did not. It did not.
Oh, and good. Okay.
Well, and I don't know if that's going to get much better, because if you look at his Wikipedia page, in the latter years, his style was under the heading of, I believe it was sex funk. So, or sexy funk. So
I think he might have been dabbling in that with our second to last track right there, which I'll be more than happy to expand on when I get my piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, he definitely did not continue with the same type of genre of music. He expanded into different ways. I don't know if that, I listened to a little bit of those later albums because I thought that sounded interesting, and I was not a fan. So, I can't really speak to saying, oh, then if you don't like this one, go to those.
Yeah,
maybe it's your thing, maybe not. But this is seen as, obviously, it's the highest ranked album that he's got in the 60s here. He thought that the album Star Sailor actually was his crowning achievement, but that was much more. He also did a lot of avant-garde stuff, which I listened to a little bit of Star Sailor and didn't really connect with me at all musically. It was avant-garde is a good way to describe it. So. Yeah. So, John, did you any awareness of Mr. Buckley here?
I'm somewhat familiar with Tim Buckley by name in terms of hearing a couple songs just growing up from older relatives, and obviously I know he's Jeff Buckley's dad. And so I vaguely remember around the time that I first started listening to Jeff Buckley being curious about his father and listening to some tracks, probably 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. Actually, so that would have been after I was first aware of Jeff Buckley, but just for some reason I was probably down a rabbit hole. So that was my familiarity with him, which was not much at all. I've got all kinds of thoughts on this album, but I don't want to jump in till you guys have had your say, because like I said, I feel like Josh is coming in hot this week. So I want unfiltered Josh. Give the audience your take right now. What do you think? You're listening to this cold like we were. What do they need to know?
Yeah, I really struggled with this album. I found it a little distracting between all of the kind of circus music themes and almost like Renaissance themes based on some of the titles of the songs. I really couldn't get on the vibe of this album. I'm always going to give the albums the benefit of the doubt. I'm not a hater. I want to enjoy these things, but this one was really tough. John, what did you connect to, or maybe enlighten me as to things that you pulled out?
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny because it revisited certain things we talked about in other episodes. Like, it had the sound effects, which I feel like for whatever reason, if you were producing an album in the late 60s, even if you were making a truly great album, you just could not resist throwing in sound effects, and the first thing you hear on the album is sound effects, jarringly. Right ahead sound effects. So that's
a lot of
one
thunder
thing.
and lightning too. It's not just sound effects at all. It all seems
lot
around
of thunder and
lightning. Well, I guess you can't hear lightning, but still, you assume that it's in the background as well. Yeah,
lot of sound effects. That raga that Matt was talking about came in a little bit, but it was never really committed to. I would say would be one thing. So there's another callback to earlier episodes. Was there? I want to start with two things, though, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. I'm going to put both of them out there, and then you can jump on either of them. Number one is, at times, it was remarkable how much voice-wise Tim Buckley sounded like the Monkees. And I love the Monkees, but my take was, as I was listening to it, I can't tell you how many times I said to myself, I would rather be listening to a Monkees album right now, because it's that same sound, but without all the gimmicks and a little bit more self-awareness and not the attempts for seriousness. I mean, it was fascinating to me. And the second thing was the lyricism was all over the place, because you had a song like Pleasant Street, which had some great lyrics. It had, for example, all the stony people walking around in Christian licorice clothes. I can't hesitate and I can't wait for Pleasant Street. I mean, that immediately gives you a feel for what he's talking about. It's evocative. But then you get to, like, Goodbye and Hello, the self-titled, and you get the velocity addicts explode on the highways, ignoring the journey and moving so fast. Their nerves fall apart and they gasp but can't breathe. They run from the cops of skeleton past. I mean, he had to have been busting that out in that one group that you were talking about with the spoken word and the funk, because that is like word salad, basically. Right? I don't even know what that means. It's just a bunch of words thrown together like bad beat poetry. So from a lyric standpoint, it was like a 19-year-old trying to show gravitas. And Matt kind of said his first one was, or 20-year-old, I guess, but Matt said the first one sort of was straight ahead and didn't get taken sort of as earnestly. And he definitely went all in this album lyrically to try to, I think, have more gravitas with his lyrics.
Well, interestingly enough, John, that you bring up the lyrics, that they were all over the place. Those lyrics the Pleasant Street lyrics were written by Buckley. He wrote that song totally on his own. And then the Goodbye and Hello, he wrote the music, but Larry Beckett wrote the lyrics. So that might explain why they're a little all over the place. And
they are the yin and yang of this album. I mean, Goodbye and Hello, as the kids would say, is cringe. And then, the other track was Pleasant Street was excellent. Actually, it stood out as being, if I were to identify one song, I liked Phantasmagoria in 2. I have to say that. Phantasmagoria in 2. There we go. That would be the other one that I felt was a pretty good song. But that's the first two places you can go, and you can kind of, if you weren't feeling it, you can kind of leave after those two, I'd say. But what do you guys think about some of the stuff I brought up there? Did you notice any of that stuff, or is that just my bizarre mind going in those directions?
I didn't notice the Monkees, but I see what you're saying, and I would assume that that's probably mostly connected to Davy Jones. Or are you saying there's other
He
singers?
Sounds a lot more like Mickey Dolenz, I think, in terms of, if you think of like Pleasant Valley Sunday, I feel like Tim Buckley's voice goes in that kind of direction. But unlike, the Monkees, who were, it's funny to say this because that's a whole different conversation, because I think the Monkees are the most underrated band of the 60s. But they were, had a couple accomplished musicians who knew pop sensibility and were able to round stuff off. I feel like this is what happens when you have that type of voice, but there's nothing to sort of rein it in. So there's a circus thing. There's the beginning of sex funk, which in the song Night Errant, I literally wrote, this song certainly is sexually charged out of nowhere and direct in a way that certainly stands out, almost Kiss-like in its directness of sex. So, yeah. So
Love
and
gun.
I said it's hard to analyze because it's a short song that's clearly designed to get in and get out, pun intended.
Well, you know what I thought of when I heard that song? Because that's another, I want to point out that was another song lyrically that was written by Beckett. So Tim Buckley did. So it falls in line with what was going on with Goodbye and Hello. But when I heard that song and a couple of other songs on this, I was thinking of that scene in Animal House with the toga party where the guy is singing on the staircase to the girl, and Belushi comes down and he's like, I gave my love a flower. Yes. And then Belushi just stares up and then all of a sudden smashes the guitar. And that's kind of what I wanted to do in the song,
It's not even sweet, though. It's basically like a an attempt at a raunchy sex song, but sung by a guy who, like I said, if you ever heard if you've not Davy Jones, the more sacro, but like, Mickey Dolenz also has a sweet voice. It's like if the Monkees wrote like a really overt sex song, but without the guitar and the production that makes it this tight pop song. Like that. I hope that makes those who haven't listened to the album just run to go listen to Knight Errant, because I can only imagine what you're thinking it sounds like. So.
No, but the thing that I was caught most with his voice was the thinking, now I understand where Jeff Buckley gets his pipes from.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is his dad. It's very similar, and the idea that, that Jeff Buckley came from this guy totally makes sense. And I think...
and make no mistake, he can sing.
Yeah.
That's what we're not getting at, that he can't sing. He can sing. And
Pleasant Street, as you mentioned, John, is that I felt like I was listening to something off of Grace, from Jeff Buckley. That was and I would agree that is one of, there are three songs on here I think are really, really good songs. That being one of them. I agree that Phantasmagoria in 2 was a great song too, as well as I really liked Once I Was. That to me sounded like early 70s, late 60s Neil Young, with the harmonica and the kind of like the cowboy-esque kind of thing. But it also built, there was some drumming in there that I really liked. I thought that was an excellent song. And all three of those songs had nothing to... Larry Beckett had nothing to do with them. They were all solely written by Jeff Buckley. So I think that this album probably could have been better if Beckett just stood on the sidelines.
I would, and I'm going to guess I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain, which is clearly about either his marriage or a relationship or someone's marriage, had to have been written by him too, because it resembles those other three songs way more.
Yeah. No, that was totally written by him, and that was written about his first wife, who he married right out of high school because there was a fake, she thought she was pregnant, but it turned out that she wasn't, so they got married, and then she got pregnant with Jeff Buckley, and a month before she gave birth, Tim Buckley took a hike. And that song, I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain, is basically addressed to her and to Jeff Buckley, essentially saying, I never really asked for this. I never really wanted to, so it's kind of...
Well, I was going to say, was that before he left or after?
Because after.
I was going to say, because it's basically like a Dear John letter on the way out the door would be how I'd describe the lyrics. And even if you're not a lyric person, I would imagine it's hard to not hear them in that, because it is, once again, very straightforward.
Yeah. So
that was actually my favorite song on the album was I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain. I think it was something about the guitar, and kind of it was more like power driven, or I don't know, like stronger guitars or something, and more jam influence versus more like laid back. So.
That was like Richie Havens. I felt like he was, channeling, it sounded like a Richie Havens song at, Woodstock, just really playing earnestly on the guitar. I like that song too. I thought it was too long. I think that when you have the bongo drums going all chaotic in the background for 6 minutes, it's starting to wear on me a little bit. And I think that I would have liked that song if it was halved. I'd probably, instead of 6, go for 3. I thought that was okay. But there wasn't one of the 3 that stood out. But to me, anyway.
I would agree, although I think the lyrical content on it is so much stronger than the rest of the album. Like I said, there's other songs that have great wordplay, but that's clearly a song that he is writing about himself. And we talked last week about Leonard Cohen, where I said it just didn't feel as personal to me. And he was writing about people, but not from a standpoint of true intimacy. Like, this is one, you heard that song and you knew it was a lived experience, and that really came through. So I wonder what you could condense it down to, just because of the fact that it is so intimate. And I'm guessing that it probably was the piece I'm just guessing here, but I would guess it's the piece he spent the most amount of time on, because there's the most stuff going on in the background, there's the most production, the lyrics are the most complicated. So
yeah, and that comment is all about the music, so maybe that would be different. If you want to keep the lyrics, fine, but just mix it up a bit. I just felt towards the end of it, I was just ready to turn it off, because I was just sick of the guitar. I wanted something different. I just thought it was a bit much. But Josh, was that the only one that you liked? You don't seem happy about many of these.
I did like Pleasant Street. I'm wondering, briefly back to the sound effects for a minute. I'm wondering if the sound effects in the first track are actually bombs exploding, because the song title is called
right.
No Man Can Find the War.
That was how I heard.
You're probably right.
Yeah,
yes.
and that's what I heard too. I did pick up on the sound effects again, like what we've been saying.
It was like a very, for a like anti-war song, it certainly wasn't Joan Baez. You know what I mean? It was very like boilerplate, I felt. And I would bet, and I'm going to I could be wrong, I'm going to bet that the lyricist wrote that song. Because it's, yeah, because it's very, it's like what you would imagine a war song would sound like if you weren't at war and just wrote it at age 20. You know what I mean? Without having been in it. It fell a little flat for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought, and I found this album very interesting because there were 3 songs that I really liked, which I mentioned already. 3 songs that I hated. Like
there were a couple
Goodbye.
What were they, out of curiosity?
Well,
that was the one. Yeah,
is the number one. I felt like that was
a
show tune that went horribly awry.
It's like
all over the place.
The worst possible Jethro Tull song you could get. Would be
I
how
like
I'd
Jethro
describe
Tull.
it.
Well,
that's what I'm saying. If you like Jethro Tull, it would insult you. If you hate Jethro Tull, it's like, oh my God, here's Jethro Tull, but like a bargain basement version of it. You know what I mean? It's like, so you're a lose-lose in both situations. I agree with you. It's probably, of the 7 albums we've talked about so far, it's probably my least favorite song on any of the 7 albums.
I would agree.
So
it's more unlistenable than Mind Gardens.
Oh yeah, I agree, because Mind Gardens at least had pompous ambitiousness, but ambitiousness. This song was just sort of, I don't even know what it was.
The other bad thing about this song was there were a couple of times where I thought it was over, and then he jumps right in with like a lute and like a car. It's very Renaissance. Josh, I think, brought that up earlier. Actually, I was listening to this and my wife goes, "What the hell is this? Did this guy get fired from medieval times or something? Like, what is he doing?"
Well, and you also get like "Womanwood Bliss, I Am Strong," and "The Man Fire That Burns, I Can Give." I mean, that's, as a lyrics guy, that's that is not. It's like, I don't even know what that's supposed to be. Is that supposed to like be sexually charged? Is that supposed to be like talking around sexually charged language? Is it supposed to create an image? Because I don't know what that's supposed to create. But, and I don't mean to pick on it, but yeah, I agree with you 100%, Matt. There's that one and one other one, and I'm curious to see what you pick.
The other two, I hate it. We already talked about it. Night Errant, I hated. It was terrible. The only good thing about that song is that it's only 2 minutes long, so you don't have to suffer from it too long. And I really don't like Carnival Song, which sounds exactly like you would think it is, because it sounds like a carnival, and it's just, and I don't understand why that's a pleasant thing to listen to. So I hated those 3, and then the other 4 I thought had some moments, had some things that I thought, this is okay. You know, this isn't. I thought Hallucinations had a couple of interesting guitar parts. Again, it was, the lyrics were written by Beckett, so it's kind of all over the place or a little eye rolling. But Morning Glory and No Man Can Find the War, I found some bits in that I liked, but I just found it interesting that I was all over the map in terms of really liking stuff, really hating stuff, and then being in the middle. So it's very comprehensive in that regard for me.
He's definitely still maybe trying to feel himself out and figure out what works for him, because he's got a lot of different themes going on, a lot of different settings between carnivals and Renaissance fairs and stuff. Yeah. So he must dial it in at some point, I think. Well,
and I'm definitely going to visit at least Star Sailor later. I didn't visit it this time, but I'm curious to see what he evolved into. I mean, when I did a preliminary read on him, I did hear that basically he was reinventing himself through a lot of albums, and he died very young.
Yeah,
just like Jeff.
Yes, So that's Curse. And I don't want to belabor things too much, but we talked a little bit about how he evolved. He had a lot more albums. He never really found much critical or commercial success, and actually by the time of his death, he was pretty much broke. I forgot to mention, during his sex funk period, he had lyrics that included "whip me" and "spank me." So there you go. If you're getting a little on the kinky side with Tim Buckley there,
that's pretty G rated for sex funk, though. When you think of Rick James and stuff. I mean,
well, he was
"Whip
also
me and spank me" or early Prince. You know what I mean? That's like that's child's play.
It's still like early 70s, so they're still feeling their way out, I guess, maybe. But so he he still played a lot of shows, and actually right before his death he had finished a show in Dallas, Texas, that was sold out for about 1,800 people. So not a huge audience, but he did have a following. And if you look online at some message boards and stuff, there's people that really, really like his music and people that were really, think that this album is amazing. And so, there's something for everybody, I guess. But so on July 28th, 1975, after the show in Texas, a friend of his, Richard Keeling, joined Buckley for a weekend of drinking and partying, and he eventually broke out a bag of heroin, which Buckley ingested, and basically that killed him. The next day, he was taken home. He was quite inebriated, and his second wife, put him to bed, and she went to check on him a couple hours later, and he was non-responsive and blue, and basically was pronounced dead on that day. So yeah, he did die early. He was, it was in 1975, so he's like 20. My math is not good out here. I don't have that on me in front of me.
Well, if he's 20 in 67 and he died in 75, he'd be 28, right?
28, yeah. So right, and so and his
Jeff Buckley was 27, right?
I don't know. He's somewhere around there. Somewhere around there. I don't remember exactly how old he was either. But some people said that the death wasn't terribly surprising, as he was, prone to taking chances with his life, including dangerous driving, lots of alcohol and drug use, including heroin and pills. And interestingly enough, Keeling, his friend who provided the heroin, was actually charged with murder and distribution of heroin, and he eventually pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, and he was sentenced. Wow. He was sentenced to 120 days in prison and 4 years of probation after failing to complete community service. So I don't know if he he got community service for manslaughter and then he didn't clean up the trash off the side of the highway.
I could do the 120 days, but I'm not doing this goddamn community service. I'll tell you.
So I found that interesting, but yeah, the guy was charged with murder. So Buckley, behind him, obviously, we're going to talk about Jeff Buckley later on when we get to the 90s, and but he not only had some influence there, but he also was credited as influencing Nico, David Gray, the Monkees. There you go, John.
Oh, wow. Okay, there we go.
James Taylor, Nick Drake, Counting Crows, Townes Van Zandt, and Radiohead, which I did not. I mean, I knew Radiohead was
that
Jeff
had to sting
Buckley.
For you, Matt.
Yeah, a little bit. So that's how the album goes down, and I would say I can't recommend this as an album. It's all over the place. I would recommend those 3 songs. So within the age of Spotify, I would definitely hit up Once I Was, Phantasmagoria, and Pleasant Street. And I think that that's good enough as far as I'm concerned. And definitely stay away from the Goodbye and Hello, Night Errant, and Carnival song. But as an album, I got to go thumbs down here. This is not something that I would really go back to. But I might put those other songs on a playlist of some, like a mix of some sort. So, Josh, what do you? I'm sensing a thumbs down coming from your side of the room.
You would be correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not like this album that much, and I probably won't ever listen to it again.
Nail in that coffin.
Sorry, Tim Buckley.
Ghost stuff,
Buckley, yeah. But yeah, that'll be my next song, The Ghost of Tim Buckley. But yeah, check out the individual tracks. I am interested to see what the later albums sound like, but I don't like this.
You're not going to like them.
Okay, well,
yeah. John, what about you?
I wouldn't recommend this. However, I do think that there would be people listening that will like this more than we did, because, like I said, Tim Buckley can sing, and
yes,
there's some gems in here. And I also think that because we've spent a fair amount of time dumping on it a little bit, I think it's worth listening to, because I don't think that we're necessarily going to be the consensus opinion, and he's got enough of a pretty rabid following of different people who still will vouch for him that I don't have any doubt that there's going to be people who will like this album. But here's what I would say to this. Give it a listen. Give it an honest listen. And you may find that you like it. For me personally, and it sounds like for the 3 of us, maybe not so much, but it isn't like such a dud that I couldn't see someone getting value out of it. So that would be my recommendation.
John, would you recommend that if they're going to listen to the entire album that they should still skip over the title track of Goodbye and Hello? Is that even worth a listen?
See, it's hard for me because my bias is always, if you're going to listen to an album, you listen to the album, right?
Yeah.
If not, you might as well buy the greatest hits. And so my take is if you just wanted to listen to some songs, then just buy Tim Buckley's Greatest Hits. And then you can figure out, do I like Tim Buckley career anthology? But, when you're listening to albums, you're listening to an artist at a time. And that's why I'd say, figure out if you like Tim Buckley as a 20-year-old in the same way that at some point I'll listen to Star Sailor, and figure out if I like Tim Buckley as a 24-year-old, 23-year-old, whatever he was at that time. And, if nothing else, it sounds like he made different albums. So I'll hold out the idea that there might be, maybe I like sex funk. Tim Buckley. I don't know. You know what I mean? I like lots of other. I get what you'd call sex funk.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
Yes.
It does. It's definitely intriguing for sure. So
yeah.
well,
yeah.
right on. So I think that's the end of that.